Okay, thank you everyone. Saturday after the vote. We have three presentations in this panel. The first one, knowledge and power in China's economics education, looking into the amount, is going to be presented by Professor Ling from Ling College, Xi'an University in China. The second paper, the transcendent importance of Chinese development for Western bourgeois democracy, is going to be presented by Meyer Almeida Phil. Is Meyer here? Okay. And the last one will be presented by myself, China as Socialist International Project and the Limits of Capitalism. I also work at the affiliated with the City University of New York, that's the University of China. And each of us, the session ends at I think 11:15, so we have a lot of time. Each of the presenters shall have 15 minutes, not a bit more. And after our presentation, then we'll start taking questions. Okay.
Okay, that makes it half time.
Hello everyone. My paper is knowledge and power in China's economics education. This is the outline. The first we see the background. The first is the factor. This picture is a rank by China Education Ministry. A plus, A minus represent the rank of the subject. From one table, we can the teachers who teach practical economics is very fair. For example, the University of China is a university which has stress on practical economy. It has 3 lectures. Well, we can see there are so many 0 lectures of political economics. Table 2 is from a rank of Shanghai University of Finance. We can see the first is Peking University, but it has no lecture of political economy. And the professor of political economy is only one. The number is in its school of economics. From this table, we can see so many zero teachers who teach political economics. This figure is show that the most important journal of China. It published a paper of political economy is slowing down so fastly. This figure is show of journal research journal 经济研究 which is the first rank of China journey. It also hardly published practical economics. This accumulation is so disadvantageous for teachers of practical economics. So the question is how Marx's political economy was marginalized in China. We think knowledge and power in academic reshaping the journal. Second, economic education. From the historical research, China economic education is mainly Marx's political economic before the year of 1978, but after 1978, the economic education is the main interest of neoclassical economics. The Marx's political economy is marginalized, very fast. To reveal the factor of reason, we deduct a questionnaire. This is the sample distribution. using the background of our survey is the introduction of neoclassical economics to the class of China economic education frequently and so much. If we see the question from the context of globalization, this process is evolution of neoliberalism. From fingers the three we can some students attitude who hold a neutral attitude. The most reason is unattractive teaching content. So they dislike the practical economy. From the figure, we can see a reason is the upscale textbook with less cases. In another word, the practical economic textbook is so abstract and is full of theory. Without cases. From the figure 6, we can see the relation between students' living standard and their interests in PE. We find if they are living in a good family, they likely lack of practical economy. From figure 7, we can see students in different level, but we found any differences. From figure 8, we can see the framework of students the application of practical economic is 32 frequently. We conduct this question fair as a tool demonstrator that economics education matters, especially PE. In order to change the situation of PE, we need to develop a path of development and program in economics. Thanks for this. I'm sorry, my spoken English is so poor.
Thank you for the presentation. It's on time. Is Maya here? He's not at the conference. Could he be on Zoom by any chance?
I don't know where he is. If he's in Brazil, then it's very good. So it's not here. Probably.
Okay.
Continue.
All right. So we have one paper left in panel, which is by myself. I'll just share my screen. Hi. So again, I'm Zhun Xu. I teach for many years at the City University of New York. Now I'm familiar with Sun Yat-sen University of China. My topic today is some very preliminary discussion on the limits of capitalism in China, or China as a socialist international project. And normally when we say international, it means different countries, but we know that a country can have different nationalities. And that, at least that was the standard socialist principle, that different nationalities can come together in one country. And so in that way, it was international. I'll explain what do I mean by this very quickly. Right. Although Marxists are always very skeptical about any exceptionalism and special and cannot be explained by some general laws, tendencies. That being said, we have to recognize that there are very specific historical conditions which can lead to very different outcomes. The very divergence of the East and West, the decline of the Ottoman Empire, and all of those cannot be explained by some general rules and laws. They have to be explained by specific conditions. And China, it does deserve some kind of special consideration in this sense. It Oh, yeah, yes. No, not really. You know how to do it. This is big enough. This is good. Okay. All right. Thank you. So anyway, I think one of the distinguishing features of what we know as China today, that it was having governed by a centralized authority for a very long time, despite many waves of changes and ruptures. But that continuation, it really defines what we know as China. What we would have today is the so-called big one rule or uniformity. That was an idea that dates back to sometime BC. So it has been there for more than 2,000 years. And the idea that we have unification of capital, rights, between thoughts, astrology, and many others. That is why if you go to China, different parts of China, we can speak very different spoken language or dialects, very different from the standard dialect that some of us are not so good at. But the writing system, that is the same thing we share. I mean, that's one of the reasons why they maintain a big empire throughout the years. And we know that to maintain a big empire, just like the Ottoman Persian Empire, you have basically the empire is a combination of many different little groups, ethnic groups, and all those little kingdoms. And you have to balance the regional and kingdom interests at all times. By nature, that encourages competition among different regions, because that would really contribute to internal conflict within this big empire. It would discourage competition. To a certain extent, it would also discourage division of labor within the whole empire. Or in Wallerstein's term, that it prevents the development of so-called world economy within this territory. Different from Europe, where you have very, very disaggregated power in this place. I mean, the religious belief was widely shared, but the political power was very disaggregated. The classical Western European feudal form, and that was where capitalism first successfully developed. It was at the margin of the society. It was at a place where there's not so much central power. The whatever Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire, a story, it didn't really affect. And when capitalism developed, it also prospered in the form of nation states. When, for example, when the war was happening here in Constantinople, whatever emperor, Roman emperor, didn't have to bring anything. Like they didn't have to bring the people from Spain, for example, to help here. It was totally separate. In that way, some of them can prosper, and at the expense of other regions. The whole, Western Europe developed, and Eastern Europe became the bread maker or the footprints for the West. And all those things that couldn't quite happen in the empire setup or under the big one rule. So when we get to the 20th century, when China and Ottoman Empire and many other, Eastern empires have to reckon the modern society, and they have to make a transition into the modern type of nation state or something like that. And obviously that transition has different consequences in different places. But fundamentally, everywhere people have to wonder, like, what is this? For example, if I'm in Ottoman Empire, then what is Ottomanian? In China, what is Chinese? Obviously, out of the empire tradition, and thinking about the Western influence by the Western nation state style, that you have, well, maybe there's no China. I'm just one of the big region. And yes, and there are very clear separatist tendencies already 100 years ago, well, at the beginning of the 20th century. And people had legitimate reasons, like, we can build our own separate nation out of this old Chinese territory. They can easily have 20 different nation states, which was like in Ottoman Empire, we have now Turkey and all those nation states. But in China, I would argue it really overcome the 19th century nationalist movement. It moved to something, I think, higher than that. It's a socialist-oriented nationalist movement. So it's international. It doesn't doesn't favor separatist tendencies. Rather, it calls for solidarity among different nations. Together, you use the socialist project. That is the Chinese Revolution and the rebuild China. In that way, China is became the only large country that mostly preserves its pre-modern territories and people. No other places has done this, but the Chinese Revolution was able to achieve this. So basically, you have a big country, a socialist country, with different nationalities officially recognized in that country. And that worked very well under the planning economy phase. With economic planning, the central planners give priority to minority development. They get special treatments, they get all those kind of stuff. Soviet Union also did this. It was after the model of the Soviet model. But I think the key difference is that the Soviet Union didn't have a long history of this big one rule, one unified central authority. So in the constitution, for example, the Soviet Union would say, Soviet Union is a socialist federal state. It's a federal state. Every part, every republic, quite independent from each other. China is a single multinational socialist state, having official definition. So it's a single state containing multinationalities, which is again not usual in the capitalist sense, because in America there's so many different people, but then we're all American, right? And we don't say, oh, you are this nationality, you are that nationality. In terms of nationality, it's all American. Although you can have whatever African descent or Korean descent and all stuff like that. You have identities, but not in the nation state where you have nationalities. And with this nationality that was preserved, even strengthened during this planning economy socialist phase, then China entered the dramatic market reform, which really brings back a lot of market relations, transformed everything in the market. And when you do that, capitalist relations would make a comeback. And then that with the already existing different nationalities, that there are 56 nationalities recognized in China. And in capitalism or in market economy, very easily people can envision, you can have different 56 nation states or something like that. So the introduction of the market forces inevitably strengthened separatist tendencies. Just like in Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union introduced shock therapy, then you end up with many different small republics, plus Russia. And in China, the same, different ethnic regions, then they have their own, form their own capitalist class, and they have their own tendency to form their own nation states. And that caused huge political troubles for China, as if China wanted to maintain itself as one single state, and that I think there is some inherent conflict there. I'm going to be very brief, but so throughout 1980s and 1990s, there was intense conflicts and separatist movements in different parts of China. I mean, in Western media, what has been often mentioned is the Uyghur separatist movement. There was the Tibetan separatist movement. There was a Mongolian separatist movement. There was all kinds, even just all these big minority groups, and every one of them, with the logic of capitalism, market economy, you will have a tendency of forming these own nation states. That logic. But obviously, anything like that would deny the existence of China in one big project. So it has this fundamental conflict there. The Chinese state, this has been on the top agenda of the Chinese state from the 1990s, and also intellectuals. Because again, how do we understand China? How do we really perceive China? from 1954, when the People's Republic had its first constitution, to 2004, that's about 50 years. The PRC made many revisions to its constitution, but they always maintain this one claim that the People's Republic of China is a single or unitary multinational state created jointly by the people from all its nationalities. Again, starting from the 1990s, with all the tensions and separatist movements, there are people, scholars, officials, and they say, well, maybe all the problems are created by the very recognition of nationalities. Maybe we should learn from the United States. That became the mainstream idea that because in the United States, they argue there's so intense tension among different groups, racial groups. But all of them, they didn't have separatist tendencies. Like, the black people didn't say, well, let's just go forward and build a black republic, something like that. So they said, well, maybe we should do what a typical, let's say, a bourgeois nation does. That's creating one nation out of this process. Instead of the socialist principle that we recognize the different multiple nationalities, now we merge everything into one nationality. Everyone becomes just one ethnic group, which this tendency, as you can see, in the 2018 constitution, the more recent one. Now you see the language change that the People's Republic of China is a unified multi-ethnic state, whatever that means, founded by the Chinese people of all ethnic groups. Right? So it moved right. I mean, this is one of the really attempts of, constitutionally moving away from the socialist international product into American style, ethnic governance. We're all, different ethnicities, but there's only one nationality. This change comes from some, I think, misuse of theory, misunderstanding of history, and all those other things. But at the same time, the Chinese state did take it seriously in many other ways. This is only formal change. In terms of economic change, let me mention this this trend that because to maintain again the big one rule, no matter whether maybe the leadership likes or not, they have to maintain a balance between different regions and different nationalities or ethnicities, whatever they want to call it. That showed up in the actual fiscal or surplus spending in different parts. Here we have two lines. The gold line is the relative fiscal income of all the minority regions. So all the big autonomous regions plus the smaller ones, they all together. Their fiscal income compared to all other places. So there is no real much difference in terms of income. It's mostly zero. The difference is zero. But you look at the actual spending. In the 1980s, you see a very clear decline. I mean, that was when the monetary reform was introduced. There was a whole rethinking about whatever national policy. There was a chaos period. But starting from the 1990s, very clear that the government started to spend much more increasingly of all these minority regions, which is clearly very different from their actual income. So all those minority regions run huge deficits, and there was no austerity imposed on any of those, and they were very generous or were very careful in implementing social programs, building infrastructure and all that. It's very, considering all the market turn in China over the past few decades, the fact that they were able to do this, it suggests that they have to, in important ways, have to deviate from the neoliberal doctrine. A recent example is the anti-poverty campaign. Because a lot of those so-called poverty population concentrated in the minority region or autonomous districts, and it's very hard to quantify how much surplus that China actually mobilized to spend in those, in this campaign for the minority region. But just looking at some of the official descriptions, in order to, international achieve moderate status can enhance 343 counties in 9 provincial level units. That's mostly in the more prosperous eastern parts. They have often paired statistics 500, more than 500 poor counties, 14 provincial units. Basically, every rich county has to devote a significant part of their surplus to the minority region, so to help them build stuff and improve their lives. And from 2013 to 2020, there are 9 eastern provincial units, basically, big cities and provinces, invested more than 100 billion RMB in government and social assistance funds in their, in their targeted poverty alleviation areas. They mobilized more than 22,000 local enterprises, invest 1 trillion, more than 1 trillion there. And that the developed part and the minority, mostly minority, underdeveloped part, they exchanged, more than 100,000 officials and technical personnel. This is a scale that's unimaginable, I would say, in any typical market economy. The amount of surplus involved, the political determination of the central state to maintain balance, to make sure that we have this relatively balanced development in the whole big territory. I think it means that you cannot follow capitalism quite much. That's why I argue that this is China as a socialist project. It defined what is China today. If anyone or any force, any class wants to change that, like we want to go capitalist, it almost certainly means that the very China that we know today will cease to exist. But that is I don't think any class in China had political determination or even courage to envision that outcome. After thousands of years of big one group, that is a strong sense that we need to keep everything together at the expense of the market, at the expense of the capital, etc. So I think to that, even without mentioning all the other political factors, the very existence of China as a big project, the long history of big one rule implies a very important limit of capitalism in China. That's the end of my presentation. Unless Maya is here, then that's the end of our presentation. Any questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you for the presentations. And
Welcome here.
I just want to ask you, because I read your book From Commune to Capitalism.
Yes.
So I think it was quite clear in your book that China has actually restored capitalism after the market reforms in 1978, especially in the rural area. But what you're saying here today is saying China is still embarking on a socialist project. So have you changed your viewpoint? If you think it has going back to socialist project, so when did that happen? Or do you want to say more about the changes, socialism, capitalism, and socialism?
Sure.
How did that? How do you reason with it? Yeah.
Thank you, Santi. Let me just respond one by one. So Santi mentioned very generously mentioned in a previous book that I wrote, From Commune to Capitalism, where we discussed the transition in agrarian relations in China, the dismantling of the rural collectives, the people's commune, and the transformation obviously from that to a dominance of capitalist relations. I think there is a very clear tendency of development capitalist relations in China. Economically, it's quite capitalist. But at the same time, I want to point out that the kind of capitalist relationship that was able to develop in China, very fragile. It has its own limits. Because thinking about this like a war, the capitalist forces obviously winning again, but there's a point that they will reach a limit and where they might get weakened, or the trend can reverse to a certain extent. I think one of the factors is this because it violates the very existence of China as this big country. Again, if the capitalist forces are determined enough, or they're strong enough, they say, well, we don't even care about whatever China is, and just divide China into different parts, and Hong Kong will be one city-state, something like that. Maybe. But that, I think, none of the actual capitalists have the political will or courage to even think about this. This is the big one rule, unlike in Soviet Union, where it's relatively new. And when the Belgian states they move away from the Soviet Union, that's like, yeah. But there's a different case in China, where it's like the history is much longer. The uniformity and the idea of belonging, whatever Chinese history identity had a much larger role in this process. So that in that sense, I think capitalism, despite its very clear triumphant, development in the past few decades, it has its own limits and it's very fragile. It has not secured its rule. I think that's what. Of this.
Thank you a lot for your presentation. I have two main objections because people online, they need to get close to the. And I have two main objections, or maybe the warning on what to say. One is you seem to reduce capitalism into an act of internal classes. I mean, capitalist classes inside. Okay? Or let's say capitalist classes outside. Translation classes in English. But indeed, I think China is part of global capitalism because it's disciplined by money. I mean, your point on austerity is a very clear example. So it's, as long as China tries to basically exist as a powerful state within global capitalism, it's a part of global capitalist competition. So that's why it's capitalist. Okay, so it's not. If we talk about Chinese capitalism, we can't simply look at specific classes, class groups, etc. But we have to understand this notion of money as an important disciplinary force for that. Another issue is, I think you seem to equate ethnicity with nationalism, because in the way that nation state form developed in the West, okay, ethnicity had acquired a specific political meaning that equalizing the citizens with equal rights, basically, in front of the state. Inevitably, as part of this, providing them with some democratic rights, etc. I'm not saying that this is inevitable necessarily within global capitalism, but the Western capitalism, in a sense, combined the nationality question in a specific way with ethnicity. Okay? So what I think China has been very successfully doing so far is to continue with a capitalist project on a rather feudal basis. Okay, not giving the people meaning that working classes in different basically nationalities in what you mean, but I think these are some ethnic regions governed by powerful Chinese, let's say, interests and controlling also lower classes. Working class. Okay, so I think what China has been so far very successfully doing is mainly
a sort of a feudal capitalism, let's say, feudal in the sense of political management, capitalism in the sense of, capital accumulation, okay? And possibly what will happen to global capitalism if we won't fight against it is to have a Chinese form of global capitalism in the future and leaving aside the Western even democracy. Because possibly what China would not be able to do will be, the global capitalism as a competitive dynamic force, but possibly what the West will find it hard to do is to compete within this global context through democracy. I don't know if I can make
thank you. I assume the question is to me of, did you essentially you think I? Sure.
I'm sure Xu will answer your question about the national region. China's got capitalism after 71, so that's China's part of global capitalism, there's capitalism. Maybe his position is that China's got a weak form of capitalism, which I can't explain. But my question, or rather point of clarification, is I've just checked the different texts of the Constitution of the People's Republic of China. Right? The Chinese text for nationalities, or ethnicities is exactly the same. There's no change in that in the Chinese text. Right? So maybe I think it's only the last current translation, English translation of that text, alternative ethnicities. But the term in Chinese is exactly the same, especially the chapter on the national autonomous regions. It's exactly the same. So I think I think the translation may have been influenced by people who have come back from America and they think maybe translating ethnicities that instead of nationalities is a better way, but I don't think there's any substantial difference in terms of the constitution and how it actually functions in China. So,
okay, I think that's thanks to all the questions. Let me briefly respond. First, a technical issue about the translation. Again, there's nation, ethnicity, people, even, those are Western terms developed along the bourgeois revolution, 18th, 19th century. And so when the term was introduced in the Chinese-speaking region, there was no exact translation to those. So that's why
so there's a term called ethnicity in Chinese, which is bullshit.
But that was a very academic recent term, like some Western intellectuals.
Yes.
It sounds a little, but the official term for this is Minzu. Minzu refers to anything related to nationality and ethnicity. Obviously, the early revolutionaries didn't perceive much difference among all those terms. But the very fact that they were trying to, they couldn't change the Chinese words because it refers to all kinds of things. But the very fact that they tried to change the English translation really means that they were thinking in this direction. What they perceive nationality as a problem. If you understand what I'm saying.
I think they try to be process for a single Chinese nation.
That's building one nationality.
Yes.
And that is the point I'm making. To me, that is a significant change in reflect that they're thinking. And to your good points, I think that it's you're using terms in very different ways. Feudal, in Marxian terms, feudalism, capitalism refers to very specific mode of production, social relations, and you refer to feudal as a governance. But your capitalism, obviously, you're using as a mode of production. So it's adding mode of governance on top of mode of production. It's not the usual way that we use it. Then you can obviously interpret like feudal capitalism, but I don't think that's the common Marxist interpretation of those terms. And in terms of feudal legacy, maybe some, but there's 100 years of Chinese Revolution, which have really the feudal legacy have largely disappeared in China in terms of people's relation with each other, people's relation with assets. And, if you go to Britain, you see a lot of feudal legacy still there. There's a royal family still there, getting money from the people. and you address to those like your majesties. Oh, no, in China, no such thing exists, and there's very little respect to such whatever hierarchy. I think I understand capitalism as kind of a social relation between people and people and assets. There's very clear development of such capitalist market-based relations in the last few decades. What I'm saying is that it's like China in the global capitalism played a very important role. That fact itself doesn't actually suggest much about what is going on in China. I mean, for example, Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, they all played some important role in the world economy after 1960s and 70s, because in one way or another, they were part of the global trading network. Did that mean that they changed? I don't think so. I mean, so China, whatever China grow in the global capitalism, global economy is a separate question. But I'm saying that the introduction of market relations inevitably brings back capitalist relations. That coupled with this nationality, different nationalities in China, creates strong separatist tendencies, which runs into conflict with the very fact that China has a long tradition being a single state, a big one rule with many different peoples in it. In the past, some historians have commented that the big one rule in China has a limit on both feudalism and capitalism. Whatever that means, it really suggests that in certain forms of the state, the very fact that you have a large central territory, very uneven positions within that territory, and you want to have one single nation over, it's controlling all that. It has, I think, it's not compatible with the kind of capitalism at least we know as of today. But in that sense, I think it's big limit in fact. Okay. And then,
yeah, I have some thoughts on the topics. Still not very clear. Maybe words to speak with outside. Now, in the first place, China as a state that is aspired to survive in the modern world, modern capitalist world, and not just that, also aspired to transcend the ideal of capitalism in its best form. That is still an ongoing challenge. And in a sense, this is a word of appreciation. I like the way of your conception in a materialist way, putting this project in context of China confronting world capitalism. That is very important and fundamentally different from the dominant ideology we are seeing everywhere in the world, in the West. Far left claim to be follower of Leninism, claims that always and everywhere, in whatever conditions and circumstances, national self-determination is the utmost principle. And they use this to compare with the reality. And of course, the degeneration of such an idea is to claim that it's not just national self, it's regional, and ultimately done to individualism. That I mean, having lived in UK for 30 years, I have confronted all these self-proclaimed Leninists, political forces, which I think is no more than the theological view of history, rather than materialist view of history. And of course, its cousin, known as the self-proclaimed Wilsonism, also more or less the same thing. As if the state, by extension, the society is just an outcome of the social contract, rather than the outcome of the evolution of history. Now, the Chinese state has been struggling to survive in the modern capitalist world. And I think the most symbolic is the national anthem that replaced the term 中华民族, which is far more than just or repentance or whatever. Because the 中华民族 is the outcome of its the encounter and confrontation with the modern and the revolution of the Palestinian terms, systematic movement. So this it gives a very important lesson, not just for China itself, but for the rest of the world. The United States, by exception, although it is not that exception, claim to be the outcome of a kind of a free individual association of free individuals coming up to the state known as the United States. That is what claims it has been, even if it's true, in history it's not. Even if it's true, that is very much an exception in the world. Most parts of the global population, global societies, they have histories, they have a historical legacy, and they have the encounter need to struggle to survive the modern world capitalist system. And then in this light, the civilization or cultural values, such as the Big One Group, these are material forces rather than just a kind of like theology like the Bible, the self-proclaimed relativists, self-proclaimed Muslims. They like to use principles to compare the history, and that is what we have seen. All these or nonsense the arguments in the when they try to assess in Xinjiang, and even in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, which I have been very uneasy to sort of. Anyway, that's as I mentioned, I'm not very clear in the sort of thinking, but still the point that is sensible.
If you do not mind, Anomaly. I know your book, but it's the same ratio and the presentation of the European would needed to understand the Taiwan question because Europe there is but it's only a comment that my question would be, and it's not the focus of your presentation, but you had so long reflection of history. So I am provoked to ask you about these, I think you know, Pomerans and the Californians, they describe possible development towards capitalism for like the 12th century. Southern this was finished by the conquest by Northern can you explain what would, if there would not be a conquest, maybe the whole history of history, other thing, but or is it not possible? Was it not possible for the capitalist time? What is your opinion on this?
Sorry for taking the stage secondly, but I think you made it three, okay? Because when I mentioned feudalism, capitalism, you took that as face value and you didn't answer my question. Then you can go to the basics, okay? And if you talk about nationality also, then you're talking about state. So let's move to the basic Marxist idea that if we have a state, then it's a class society, okay? So what's the Chinese socialist project to overcome the class question? Okay, because whatever you talk with regard to the nationalities, is I think still power relations, ultimately which suppress the working classes in different ways, in a different political project. I resemble it to feudalism because I mean, and definitely it's not feudalism. Okay, economically, China has already become part of world capitalism. Okay, but we have a Chinese state, leave aside everything. And the very existence of the state makes it a class state. Okay, so what's socialism? We talked about the basics.
Any other questions?
So, a quick clarification in terms of the issue around that translation. So, I think it is clear from the founding of the first constitution. 54, yes. There's one single Chinese nation that under that category translates their name nationality. Can't be one of them. Right? So I think there's a fundamental change in how they see that the People's Republic is sort of a subject of transnations. And on that basis, they talk about nationality. And on that financial national deviations, etc. So I really think that the current translation, English translation, either is a mistake or it's just a mistake. There's no fundamental change from, just think that ethnicity is roughly equivalent to nationality. In China, there's been no, since the artists found, there's no treatment of different ethnic groups of nationality single with the There's no such thing. Chinese understand.
Okay, sorry for me to come back again to respond. Again, I'll start from the last. The translation, if you haven't read this, you can read, I think, a leading intellectual in China on ethnic relations, name is Mao. The changing translation largely follows his advice. He had this very clearly laid out his writings that because he realized, I mean, although he actually realized that under the planning economics, the socialist planning, whatever nationality, that is not an issue at all because there's no basis for separation. Period. But that became very different when we get to the actual, when you have really more capitalist relation. And the, in Soviet Union, I mean, all the Leninist argument for self-determination that was on the basis of nation. And it was on that basis that Soviet Union had different republics on the basis of different nations. In the Chinese case, the founders of the PRC, they obviously learned from the Soviet model.
They rejected that model.
They rejected the federal state. Right? I think this is because China has this big one rule for so long.
Much like there's one Chinese.
But they also recognize that different groups as far as nationality, which that strengthened. I mean, maybe not the intention, but it strengthened the post-1980 separatist tendency. Let me give you one concrete thing. In the West, in the last 10 years or so, there is all kinds of reports about the Uyghur people, like the anti-cleansing, genocide, all those charges, and to me that's all not true. But the very term Uyghur or Uyghur, it was a very recent term introduced by the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, the term existed long ago, but those groups, people are living in Xinjiang, they call themselves by different names. It was in the 1950s, when under the socialist principle, the government wanted to say, we need to recognize all the nationalities, because we have to respect all the socialist principle. So they said, based on historical research, you guys actually belong to one nationality, which is called Uyghur. So in the
same.
same, yes.
Many very diverse group being lumped together.
Yes.
And they vote.
Yes. So the very nationality, or 56 nationalities in China today, or a creation of the social revolution itself. So it struck me that in 1950s, when we did a survey, very few Uyghur people recognized themselves as Uyghur. By 1980s, when we did the same survey, that would suggest that most people that, oh, well, Uyghur, government told us, I mean, that was part of the formation of the identity of nationalities. So, but that was totally okay under, in the Mao period. When we get to the market economy phase, things will be different. Like you have regional differences rapidly developing, and it's like, I got this, we have oil, we have all these resources, and why you guys in the East got rich, we stay poor. I mean, very easily, get into based on nationality that would, breed separatist movements. So I think that is clear. And back to your question about this. Yeah. Well, technically speaking, when, for example, when Lenin was envisioning a new society, he recognized that this has to be a state. The whole state of revolution was about it. It's a state with the proletarian dictatorship. Lenin and all those other writers, Mao and all, they recognize that a socialist state, being a transition between capitalism and communism, is a transitory society where there is a state, and the state is a bourgeois state without a bourgeois class. So that was at least the classical Leninist definition of what is proletarian dictatorship. Now, in the societies in China, there is a state like Cuba, like North Korea, Vietnam, and all those. If we use because there is a state, then it couldn't be socialism. I think that is a very high bar for socialism. Because using that criteria, we never had any socialist society, in the entire human history. So that is obviously a criterion that we could use, but that would we will lose some insights in that criteria. So if we use actually looking at social relations and how much is governed by capitalist principles and how much was not. I mean, that I think it's just a different way of looking at things. And back to Joseph's question, let's see, you probably know more about Chinese history than me. And the question you mentioned obviously is a profound one, has been discussed, debated for many years. I tend to think that the big empire, like the Chinese empire, had a tendency not to suppress new social relations. That's my impression. Again, if the Chinese empire, instead of a big empire, you have different parts, then some part of those, by Western European standard, were very advanced. If you allow them to have their own state government and all those, I think they can easily become a bourgeois nation. But because of the centralized state, they do not have that freedom. They were suppressed. But whatever interest capital class in those regions were suppressed, they have been subjected to the bureaucrats or the landlords and all classes. I think that's why when I mentioned the capitalism developed in Europe, because it was a relatively weak form of Europe, where it's a lot of loopholes and rats in the system. And the Venetians or later Holland and the bourgeois classes didn't have to deal with such a strong feudal class. I mean, it was relatively easy. I mean, in China, in Persia, in Ottoman, it was much harder for them to do so. I think that was, the big empires part of that. I think but that's obviously a partial, partial answer, partial guess.
Maybe one element of stuff mentioned back in the 80s. Sorry, mentioned back in the 80s and 90s that there was a rise in national ethnic separatism in the so-called border regions of China. That's completely true because the market reforms have moved the eastern part of the countries, advancing in a much quicker way than the rest of the country, right? So that's true. There was a background of that. But I think we must also consider the fact that in the last 10, 15 years or so, there's been a huge effort by the central state. And this goes to one of the central arguments, right? Because you're saying, or I believe you could be saying that after 79, a weak form capitalism has taken root in China, right? It hasn't taken root, but it's a weak form capitalism. But the state hasn't collapsed, right? The state capacities have grown by leaps and bounds, right? So on that basis, they managed to systematically, and I believe substantially, lower the differences between the East and West. And you have now, with urbanization, industrialization, you have a huge degree, much more high degree of inter-ethnic, international, whichever term you wish to use, mixing within China. So you have people from the West living in the East, you have people from the East living in the West, right? So on that basis, I just can't see why, right, strengthening the notion of the Chinese nation to be problematic, because this is what the founders of the People's Republic always wanted. And also that harks back to that tradition that you mentioned at the beginning from 2,000 years ago. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Cameras.
All right. I found your insight on how the toll market reforms in the post-Deng Xiaoping era might have exacerbated some of these centrifugal national ethnic tendencies. That reminded me of the Yugoslavian experience, where they had a much bigger role, I think, in the market to play. It was market socialism. Well, we know that ended very badly in the war and even instances of genocide. I was just wondering if maybe China can have any insight to learn from this experience to avoid such a. We would like to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Edward. Any other comment? I'll just respond. Yeah, again, I really appreciate the comments. We have to recognize that market reform, when I say market reform, it's not like just reform, but we know the reform was on the basis of tears and blood, working class. It was not we. Those market reforms they introduced impoverished millions of people, despite later achievement. Millions of workers lost their job in those market reforms. And the minority regions, they used to have very well maintained, very good, state-owned enterprises, which have generated a lot of employment. In the market reform, those were not competitive enough against the Western firms, against the internal Eastern, more developed regions firms. So many of them went bankrupt. When they went bankrupt, the people lost jobs. So the market reform really, I think, made whatever tension that was already made it worse. The tendency, the separatist tendency, was really, and it was very quick. Very quickly when I say the big one rule in the Chinese long history, it was not a harmonious relationship. With all the other states, you have conflicts. And the Han group is the majority ethnicity, and it has often conflicts with all the other minorities. The last dynasty in China, the feudal dynasty, was a minority dynasty ruled by the Manchuria, which is a small ethnic group in China, but they ruled the entire China. And the tension between the majority Han and the Manchurians was tense. You know, it was part of the anti-feudal revolution, was also anti-Manchurian, like this campaign. So I think it was really the socialist revolution based on a whole new principle, not the nationalist, but the really socialist principle that were able to bring peace to different groups, different peoples, and you know, building this whole thing together. So I think that's definitely, you know, my argument really, socialist revolution had a long impact on this, you know, even if whatever the current generation leadership wants to deviate from the whole thing, the revolution, but that they are bound by that. And back to Emran's wonderful question about Yugoslavia. Yes, we know that, you know, in the whole history of Yugoslavia, the whole market reform and the disintegration of Yugoslavia was driven by the prosperous region, Slovenia. It was very clear, right? And Slovenia also provided some of the leading officials in Yugoslavia who led the radical market reforms, waves and waves of those. And we know that very well. So China differs from Yugoslavia in the sense that it had a relatively longer history under this one state. Yugoslavia was more recent, and and there is no clear majority group in Yugoslavia. You have like equal weights of in China. The majority people is Han, but the Han people only occupies half of the territory. The other half is occupied all the minorities, which is 10% of the population. So it's a very different, unique kind of a geographical political setup of the entire country. But yes, I strongly agree with you that it was the market reform which contributed to the widening regional diversity, which translated then eventually to so-called nationality conflicts and civil war and all this. And you know, to a certain extent, we know that Yugoslavia was really 100 years ago was part of the process, nationalist movement which disintegrated the Ottoman Empire. That was from all the Habsburg, dynasty. All the small newly formed nations were trying to get free from the older empires. And the civil war, the genocide, the ethnic cleansing were already there. The tendencies, they were all like 100 years ago, before the First World War, they were already there. But it was the socialist revolution in the Balkans that prevented the ethnic cleansing, prevented the very, this atrocity based on nationalism. But when Yugoslavia, all the people went back to nationalism, then he's like, oh, why are you my land? It's like, I kill you, I need to clean you out of my place. So that's the essence of nationalism. It's very exclusion based on so-called identity. So such tragedies would happen in China if China went through the same process. Thank you very much. If there's no one here, yeah. Yes.
I have a question for.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Hello, I'm Hassan, Capitalism University, say 2 kilometers down the line, the tram line. So you find that one of the reasons that researchers and students are not interested in Marxian political economy is because it is too theoretical and too few case studies, basically not really addressing the immediate issues. And, I agree in the sense that if you want to explain many everyday phenomena, demand and supply is enough. The question is why the rents are increasing, and the reason is we are not building enough houses, kind of. So my comment is, when I'm a very empirically minded person, and in my PhD dissertation, my advisor advised me, because I'm not really good at theoretical stuff, Hassan, why don't you focus on who wins, who loses, and who decides? You know, so instead of always trying to start from the either the labor theory overview or kind of analysis, do a more mid-level analysis closer to the things, and I find it useful advice. And my question is, like, maybe many of the people you classify as non-political Marxian political economists, they are still using this, let's say, I don't know, very vulgar political economy, Marxian political economy, of like focusing on who wins, who loses, and this might be a way to create case studies and analysis of what is happening, policy analysis basically, which would interest the students and the researchers. That was my comment, and also for an idea to maybe go over and look at this literature and where people are actually not using explicit Marxian political economic terminology, but they're using more vulgar methods to do case studies, so might be broaden people under the tent of political economists. That's my comment. Thank you. Yeah.
就说这个我讲的有些人根本或者他这个，但他讲的还是他关切的东西啊，他还是他可能就用自己觉得或者他觉得他欢迎这个都是自己我一天再翻一下，我在好，那一个，就是一般情况下，就是在中国的一个特定的它的一个教育环境里面，这个政治经济学一般都是特定的马克思主义的政治经济学。一般来说，这个新古典经济学，我们在那边称之为西方经济学。对，一般来说，就是在那个学生会同时上这两门课，他们可能要解决的问题、解释的现象，它确实是一个现象，只是说他们用的那个理论框架、概念确实不一样，也正因为它不一样，可能他们揭示出来的深层次的原因不一样。比如说收入分配啊，比如说收入分配贫富不均匀的话，新古典经济学一般都会认为是市场化发展不足。然后呢，政治经济学呢，就可能会觉得本身就是这个劳动过程中啊出现那个企业对工人那个分配啊，我各方面激励方面的不足。对，这是其中一个例子。我们整体上来说，他们那个经济学整体的经济学教育还是可以让学生有一个广义上面的政治学认识，包括他既学了马克思主义这个严格意义上狭义上面的政治学，他自己也学了新古典经济学，这样也可以理解为广义的。但整体上来说，中国的教育给想让学生明晰两种不同的分析方式的一个差异在哪里，就是各自的一个优势，然后综合利用，就是去解释这个问题，有一个更全面的理解，这是中国经济学教育一个总体的一个目标，我认为是这样的。So what always where the kind of the decision between political economy and non-political economy. Anything else? Marxist at all. And to give example of looking at, if there is inequality, then the harm to people oftentimes interpreted as suspicion. But the legal conflict result of so we mentioned that there is clear differences that we not very broad Marxist terminology. But he said that the Chinese economy and Palestine two things at the same time. Everyone has to know some forms, some economic. That is helpful. I don't know. Yeah. The big people. Yes. Any more questions and comments from the audience? Okay, there's no kids. Thank you all very much for attending today's.
You have extra long session,
Oh.
so you have more questions than you.
Sorry for comments.
Yeah, I mean, thank you.